Oh boy. Welcome to another coming out video. Didn't see this one coming, but you know what? Here we are. I genuinely did have a gender crisis. Solved it. Made a post about how I'd solved it. The response to the post made me go, oh no, hold up. Second crisis happened, and apparently I'm gender fluid. So that's fun. Today we are going to go through the journey and thought processes that I went through over the last couple weeks to get to the point of sitting here and telling you that apparently I'm not cis, and how autistic and traumatizedness of me kind of ties into that. That's how words work. Also, if you're new here, hello, this is a hell of a video for you to join me for. My name is Sydney, I am disabled, autistic, and gay. I make content about neuroscience and disability and psych and all that other stuff, occasionally some vintage style things, and we'll discuss pronouns later, because I don't know what they are. Image description for my blind and low vision friends. I am in the same spot per usual with the mirror behind me on my right and the leaves behind me on my left, and some vaguely bad tiny paintings of dogs in the middle. I'm wearing a white shirt and a black and white sweater, and my hair is curly per usual. So to begin this one, I'm gonna start by reading the post that started this whole journey and was supposed to end it. Basically, I was auditioning for some roles in which I needed to be not the most femme human in the entire world for those roles, and so I decided to do a photo shoot of what my friends have jokingly dubbed Butch Sydney, who is, you know, some manner an alter ego of mine. And one of the pictures I took was really cute, and I wanted to post it on my feed, but I also knew that, like, without context, a suddenly very butch photo of me in the middle of everything else would be really strange, so I had to think of a context. So, the post goes as such. Hold up. All right. Let's talk about gender. Autistic people are anywhere from 3 to 6 times more likely to be trans than allistic people, non-autistic people. So as I've been becoming more solid in my own identity and seeing nearly all of my autistic friends come out as trans in the last 3 or so years, my brain went, do I experience that too then? Because, like, statistically I should. So I did some gender exploration, played a little dress up, tested some pronouns with a handful of friends, and tried to decide what felt more me. And what I discovered is this. I found myself to be almost more comfortable in masculine clothes than my princess vibes, but when I take photos or look in a mirror, I don't really see me. It's more like a human in a costume. Also, I hate the texture of pants. Ultimately, I decided that Mask Sydney would be very great in Fun Home, and great for days when I need a break from Femme Sydney, but I don't think that's who I feel most truly me as. It's fun every now and then, but when people use non-she/her pronouns to refer to me, it doesn't feel like me. After all this, do I understand the experiences of trans people? Nope, not really at all, because I don't identify as a trans person. I haven't actually, sat down and read through this in a while. But what I did learn from this is that by questioning my gender for a hot minute there, even though I ultimately decided that I fully identify with my gender assigned at birth, I learned a lot about myself along the way, and I feel a lot more clarity about the whole thing. Well, also, I'm very sure that gender is a construct, and why does it really matter? But I digress. In the same way that I think everybody should question their sexuality and question their neurotype, if only to learn a little more about who you are and be more solid in how you identify, questioning your gender is an important part of identity finding too, no matter what conclusions you end up with. And at the time of writing said post, that was the end of the story, and I still fully stand by everything I said in that post, and I fully believe it with the exception of all of the things I said about me being cis, because, you know, the 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, after I'd written it, when it finally auto-posted, my brain was starting to go, okay, but what if I'm not cis though? But I had full intentions of just ignoring that, because, I don't have time or energy for a gender crisis, and I've also never personally been very close with my sexuality or gender identity, because trauma in relation to all of those things, and also those aren't really the minority identities that, for me, put me in harm's way in the majority of life situations like my disabilities do, so they're never at the forefront of my mind. And it was a foolproof plan to just ignore it until some good friends messaged me and went, okay, but this post kind of just described gender fluidity. And so I did some research, did some reflection, cried a little bit, and then during a long shower I ultimately decided that, yeah, I'm gender fluid. So, what is gender fluidity and what does it mean? Because when it was first suggested to me a few weeks ago, I was like, isn't that the thing where, one day you're a boy and one day you're a girl? Because I'm not that. And I learned that while it can be that, it is much more commonly not that. Basically, gender fluidity means that a person's gender is fluid. So that means that one day they may identify as agender, another day as parabinary, another day as woman, because gender is not just men and woman. That's how the binary, yeah. Anyway, it's fluid, and so it doesn't really follow a specific schedule, meaning your gender identity can change throughout the day, can be the same for a week at a time and then change. It could flow from moment to moment, and all of that is equally as valid as part of this identity. Some people feel extreme gender changes over time, some don't, and some people change how they express gender, and others don't. All of these things are super valid under the umbrella of gender fluidity. So I read that, and I went, okay, cool, like I feel that, but also I have major questions. The biggest one being dysphoria, because I have a very complicated relationship with dysphoria and gender dysphoria, and I have for a while. Basically, dysphoria without the gender in front of it is technically not a thing, but dysphoria is a sense of unease and anxiety a person feels between their physical presentation and how they feel inside. So the non-gender version of dysphoria, according to the DSM, is supposed to be dysmorphia, which is not at all what I just explained. It's a very, very different thing. So my experience with dysphoria, not as like a shortened version of gender dysphoria, but like as its own thing, is very specific and not dysmorphia or gender dysphoria, I thought. Basically, short Sydney life story, I've been into historical fashion and being girly since I was little, but then in college I got into an abusive situation that revolved primarily around gaslighting and masking and making a version of me that I wanted other people to like rather than actually myself, to the point where my sense of self completely dissolved. And this is also when I started to dress pretty butch. So backwards baseball caps, t-shirts, jeans, Converse, the whole thing. And this abusive situation in combo with some other unfortunate medical things led to a very scary autistic burnout that caused my body to just entirely shut down and nearly killed me. But then the pandemic made me go home and I started to actually get care. And through the beginning of this recovery, I had zero energy every day. So getting dressed for me was kind of all I was able to do. And that was also when I decided to manually create an identity and a sense of self for myself. Who did I want to be? How could I do that? How did I want to present myself? What did I want to look like, etc. I have a video about all this up here, by the way. But when it came to presenting myself, I decided that I wanted to look the way that fourth grade me always dreamed I would look. And that was vintage princess. And so that's finally what I ended up doing. And I finally saw myself as me that way. And I finally liked the way that I looked for the first time in my life. At the time, I was also pretty strict to make sure that I would look like this consistently every single day because I was afraid of losing the sense of self that I had created. And since then, it's become a bit more relaxed. Sometimes I will have straight hair days or I'll wear a t-shirt and a beanie, but in general, I kind of stick to one aesthetic because I like consistency and control. And like, if I feel awful, at least I look good. And if I feel great, well, hey, I look good. It's a win-win situation for me. But where does dysphoria factor into this? It's coming, don't you worry. So while this process of self-actualization was going on, I also was realizing that I had a whole heck of a lot of disabilities that I did not have pre-relationship. So some of these included memory loss, face blindness, and extreme dissociation. And a combination of that means that often when I look in the mirror, I do not recognize the person looking back at me. Not because I don't like it, not because I don't feel like that's how I look and it doesn't feel like me, just that like I was incapable of seeing that person as myself. It's a good deal better now that I've like learned to manage all of these things, but I still do have days where I'm like, oh dear, I have a body. It looks like that. Interesting, very strange. Especially when I have straight hair, it's even worse. But I've always attributed that to my dissociative disorders and my face blindness. Not the gender thing, though I did have some very interesting convos with my trans friends trying to understand what gender dysphoria meant for them in order to see if what I experienced was somewhat that minus the gender bit, because the only word that I could find to describe the feeling of looking in the mirror and not recognizing the person looking back at you was dysphoria. And overall, we concluded that it was like sort of kind of the same thing, but also not. And then when we add in the aspect of dissociative disorders and the knowledge that due to how my brain works, there was genuine concern for a while that I would develop some form of OSDD or DID, and I was low-key starting to because my brain had an aggressive need to separate itself from the human that went through a traumatic thing, and I had to put a lot of work in learning how to handle my dissociation and kind of get it under control to make sure that I did not split. Not that being a system is bad, I just didn't need another thing to handle on top of like everything else going on. I have a feeling a lot of people are gonna have a lot of questions about this in the comments. I kindly ask that you don't put them there because this is not a good time in my life. It's just important to talk about it in relation to my gender identity. But I don't really want to talk about it further. So thank Thank you for respecting that boundary. But anyway, because of all of this, I became very focused on keeping my outward expression of gender the same in order to make sure that I did not feel like I was splitting up into a bunch of little different pieces, meaning that Butch Sydney kind of disappeared kind of altogether. And it was really weird at first, but some perks of memory loss and, I forgot about it. And I forgot about how equally confident, but in a different way, I felt as Butch Sydney in comparison to Femme Sydney, and I pretty quickly did miss her because I forgot about it. Now, when I was at my program in Italy, I had the highest concentration of trans friends I've ever had, which when I was higher, but still, this led to a lot of discussions about gender and just general exposure to gender-bendy stuff, and I did bring Butch Sydney back out a little bit every now and then just for fun, mostly because, well, I discovered the sheer sensory joy of wearing beanies when I dressed up as Julia from Luca for Halloween, and also there was another time that my friends dressed me up as an 80s queer rocker thing, including leather and black lipstick and like fishnets, and all of this made me just go, I'm very confident in many different gender expressions, but also in very different ways. That's interesting. But then I remembered the whole dissociation identity situation and I went, not gonna cross that at all whatsoever. So I decided that instead this is just me enjoying my life as an actor, specifically the aspect of trying on lots of different characters and learning from them and then taking them off because they're not a part of my identity, because obviously that's all this was. Not me calling different versions of myself characters to pretend that they all weren't part of my own one singular identity and that my gender is fluid. Nothing like that. So anyway, this brings us back to this point where I was auditioning for a show and I needed to be Butch. So I decided that it would be smarter to send in a Butch headshot in comparison to, this. So I picked out a Butch outfit, I dressed up, and I did a photo shoot. And suddenly I remembered that level of confidence when I dressed that way as well. So I sent a pic to my friend and I said how excited I was to feel sexy for once because due to trauma reasons that's still kind of rare for me, but it's getting better. I'm improving. I'm really excited about that. But anyway, my friend was like, is this a gender crisis thing? And I went, nope, absolutely not. And then I thought about it and I eventually said, well, because I'm autistic and I don't do social norms very well, my gender doesn't quite fit into the binary, but it also doesn't quite matter to me because it doesn't really change anything about how I exist or how others may perceive me. And since my opinion on sexuality at this point is, screw it, I'll kiss whoever I find attractive, like vaguely within the lesbian category statistically, but also what happens, what happens, my dude. And I'm gonna kind of take the same point of view on gender. So my friend was like, super cool, good vibes, totally support you. And then I completely forgot about it because that's how I roll. And then a few weeks later, my thing auto-posted on Instagram and I got several messages saying that I was actually describing a gender identity that already exists. Then I started to wonder if, maybe I should at least try to confront my gender issues just a wee bit and find maybe a loosely fitting label, if only to know myself better. So I did a little bit of research. And my main concern here was, is my gender actually fluid or is this a dissociative coping mechanism to try to distance myself from bad things and that my desire for different gender expression is instead putting on a character to take a break from who I am for a bit, and that's not actually being trans, especially because I never really feel like a man and my dysphoria is just trauma dysphoria, not gender dysphoria, so I can't be that. Along with the anxiety of I don't like change, and wondering if I wanted to change pronouns and how I might figure that out and how I'd have to come out to people again and being terrified of losing my sense of self again by leaving this specific box of gender identity and expression that I've kind of nailed myself into. But what I decided was this. First of all, the gender spectrum is a spectrum, and just because I don't ever feel like a man does not mean that I do not slide literally all over the rest of the gender spectrum all the time. Second of all, the fact that where I sit on said gender spectrum feels like it changes all of the time is the definition of fluidity. And third of all, even if that constant change in gender identity is directly linked or correlated to my levels of dissociation and trauma and flashbacks and other mental health things in my, life at any given moment, that does not make it any less valid as an identity or an experience. And while I don't know how much my gender euphoria is caused by me feeling euphoria when dressed incredibly butch because people stare at me less, and I feel less visible and I respond to the world differently and I'm taken more seriously than this, or if it's caused by me feeling like I've given myself a break from who I am, or if it feels like just regular old gender euphoria, or if my gender dysphoria is directly related to trauma and having a hard time feeling sexy or confident in my body, which ebbs and flows over time because that's how trauma works, or if it's genuinely regular old gender dysphoria. Either way, that doesn't really matter, because regardless of specific causes of why I feel a certain way, it's still how I feel, and that deserves to be recognized as a valid experience under the terms provided, not just by other people, but also for myself. And when it comes to coming to terms with all of this, I found myself convincing myself out of every single teeny tiny piece of the identity over and over again, and continuously telling myself that that must be the situation, which, as somebody who has come out of the closet several times, first as bisexual, then autistic, then lesbian later on, I know that the fact that I couldn't get it out of my head means that on some level, the identity is in fact my truth, and that any tiny arguments that I keep trying to come up with against it are just my brain trying to avoid a change of identity and understanding of myself. Because change is hard, and internalized ableism, homophobia, and transphobia are things that everybody has and needs to work on. So, in conclusion, hi, my name is Sydney, and I'm gender fluid. At any given moment, my gender looks generally like this. I worked really hard on that. Now, I'm not sure what that means for my pronouns. I've been testing some out at the moment, and if I decide to change them, I'll let you all know. She, her is good for now. Also, in general, I still like being called a girl or a woman, because a lot of the time, that's kind of where I'm at, and it also doesn't really bother me to be called that when I don't feel like that, so that's totally cool. Also, I'm not sure what this means for my gender expression either, because I really like consistency, and therefore dressing like this every single day, but I also want to explore my masculinity and my gender-bendy identities and all of that a little bit more as well, because while I am a little bit nervous about a loss of identity, I think it's kind of good to take a risk and step off the path just a little bit in order to figure out where that path actually is. And this time I have some really awesome friends, as well as all of you guys, to keep me grounded in who I am and who I want to be in a way I didn't have before. So anyway, my Instagram might start to get a little all over the place in aesthetic. We'll see what happens. But all in all, thank you for, I'm doing a lot of things with my hands. Thank you for being here and for listening to what I have to say. I sincerely appreciate it. I thought about making this video later once I had more things figured out, but honestly, I feel like it's kind of important to see the journey as it's going and the confusion that goes into accepting and understanding a new identity. So I decided I would take this opportunity to create that representation for you all. I know that I don't make a lot of queer related content. I genuinely did mean to when I started this channel. But my interest has never really been in that direction, because that's never really been a comfy or solid identity for me. But maybe this will be some sort of impetus to do that. Or not, but at least now you know why I don't do that. But anyway, overall, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you learned something. I have some really interesting videos coming out for Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month, which I'm very excited about. So I hope that you will stick around, maybe like and subscribe, all of those good things. If you have any questions, feel free to add them into the comments. Reading and responding to your comments is my absolute favorite way to procrastinate all of my other responsibilities and also learn from your perspectives, but also procrastinate. But anyway, as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Remember, your story isn't over. It has only just begun. I think at this point, I'm very much human proof of that fact, and I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.